Well, hello everyone. Thank you so much for staying with me. I apologize for the technical delays earlier, but we are back and I am ready to talk about Oregon sparkling wine, which I think for so many of you, you probably already know that this was going to be, or maybe assumed this is going to be a natural extension of what has been happening in Oregon for some time now. And just a little brief overview of what to expect from this video today. I am very excited to be talking about a brand new producer called Lytle-Barnett. This is something that I think you're going to want to pay attention to for a few different reasons. One, it's really among the first in Oregon to be producing wines and specifically sparkling wines in this way. And two, it's really delicious. And I think if you are someone that loves sparkling wine and loves to enjoy bubbles from all over the world, this is definitely going to be one to pay attention to. So without any further ado, let's talk about Oregon, because I think this is a region that, for me has been a place that I've been paying attention to for some time now. I've loved the Chardonnays and the Pinot Noirs that are coming out of there. I've loved seeing all of the producers that have been flocking to Oregon as of late. It's been really encouraging to see the work that's being done. And I think Oregon is a very, very special place that deserves attention, not just for the still wines that they're making, but now for the sparkling wines. Oregon, just in general, I mean, if you look at the United States, we're in the Pacific Northwest. For those of you unfamiliar of like where this region is, specifically talking about the Willamette Valley, and even more specific than that, really talking about the Eola Amity Hills today, because really what we want out of our sparkling wines is a sense of place. And I think Lytle-Barnett's done such a beautiful job of capturing that. What is unique about what's happening here, and I think something that I am particularly excited about, is that there is this sort of sense of place, and that is really the differentiation between what has been done before with sparkling wine in Oregon and what is being done moving forward. So when we look at sparkling wines from across the globe, the best ones are the ones that have a sense of place, that are made for the most part in the traditional method, or the method champenoise. So where that secondary fermentation happens in the bottle and then is aged for quite some time, there's a dosage at the end of it, and then voila, we have this gorgeous bottle of bubbles, as opposed to something like the Charmat method that you see with Prosecco. What else is really interesting is that because this is not champagne, this is coming from a new world climate, you do have the added benefit of wines that don't need quite as much dosage at the end of their cycle of being made. Oh, wasn't that a beautiful, beautiful open? Great job. I'm gonna drink because wow, that was a rough 10 minutes for me trying to figure out all those tech problems. But if you're watching this after the math and you didn't know what happened, well, then nothing happened, right? Oregon, a little bit on the cooler side of things, definitely a place that we've loved Pinot Noir and Chardonnay from, because it does have some Burgundian sensibilities. We talk about it being on the same latitude, but really, I mean, it comes down to it being just a superb place for those two varieties and then some. And producers from all around the world, like I said before, they're really seeing that and they're embracing that. And what I love seeing over the past few years is a commitment to quality in Oregon just across the board. So everything from viticulture, I've loved seeing, I love listening to people like Mimi Castile, who, talks about regenerative farming. And I love the commitment that Oregon as a state, as a wine producing region, has to making sure that the wines that are being produced in Oregon are of quality. And I think their labeling has really shown us in that, right? So you look at the varietal designation. So, in other places, their designation is a little bit different than the rest of the world. So, for minimum state of variety, not to get too geeky, they want it to be significantly higher to be able to call it Oregon Pinot Noir than maybe somewhere like Sonoma. And that's not a knock on Sonoma. It's just Oregon takes a lot of pride in what they're doing. And I think, like I said, it's no surprise that we are seeing wines of quality come out of there. And it's no surprise that sparkling wine would follow suit. Let's take a sip. This video, for those of you who are looking forward to a conversation, wow. Oh, I so needed that. And that was so good. Acidity for days. I love it. If you have questions, I would love to answer them as we go through what we're going to be talking about today. So, as I just mentioned, some of the most innovative and focused initiatives in the country. So, like I said, the labeling laws are quite different. 90% of the state of variety must be in the bottle. So that should tell you a little something about Oregon. I think also what we should mention is this is sort of a rising tide situation. So when I think of other regions and emerging trends, you think about specific producers that have sort of led that charge in the way that, when I was a wine buyer in New York and running a wine program, I was looking for producers that were really going to be my official first stamp of approval for maybe a new area on a wine list. So for me, that was in many ways, the very first time. And of course, Santa Barbara Pinot Noir and Chardonnay have been around for some time. But I think about, producers like Liquid Farm and producers like Domaine de la Côte and Sandy, really that those first few producers that put the stamp of approval on Santa Barbara as a wine region to sort of expand upon that. And so when I'm looking at emerging wine regions, I'm looking for those producers. And I think that we found that with Lytle-Barnett. And I say that because, like I said before, while sparkling wine is not a new venture in Oregon, there have been and are, other sparkling wines that are produced there and great ones at that. It's just that there is a lot more focus in what Lytle-Barnett's doing and the way that we've seen other producers really just take it and run with it. And I'm so excited about what is happening with this. So really, this is a sparkling wine that is made just like champagne. It's all vintage. The fruit sourced from not just the Willamette Valley, but the Amity Hills. And what I love is that there really is a sense of place, and it goes back to that for me. And so when I taste this wine, and I have had it out of a regular wine glass, and it is just as delicious. But for whatever reason, I wanted to feel festive today, and I put it in a flute. I don't know why. But I do love my sparklings out of a white wine glass. For those of you who are like, why wouldn't you have it in there? It's so delicious. I normally would. You're right. I should totally have it in there. I am very excited to taste this with you guys, because I think this is a wine that you should be paying attention to, whether you are going to be purchasing this for yourself, whether you're a wine buyer, whether you are, buying for someone else. These are wines you should be paying attention to. So most of the only wine I'm going to be tasting tonight is going to be the Brut, which I love. I have tasted all of these before, but I did a little wine in 60 seconds on the rosé. They do a Blanc de Blanc, they do a Blanc de Noir. All of the wines are vintage, and all of them are aged for 3 years, which we love. So all of that great stuff that goes into making sparkling wine in the champagne method. Let's talk about flavor profiles right now. And I don't want to get too into the tasting profiles of these wines, but I think it's important because it lends itself to why this is not only an emerging trend, but one that we should be paying attention to. So what's different here? What's different about Oregon sparkling that we can't get anywhere else? I mean, we have many other regions that produce wonderful sparkling wines everywhere, obviously outside of Champagne, everywhere from, Italy to Spain to, of course, in California. But what's different about Oregon? And for me, you sort of have this, what we love about California, there's a lot more of that really nice sort of like sun-kissed fruit. And so I think what we all love about Oregon in general is that it sort of plays this middle ground between old world and new world. So a region that is definitely on the cooler side of things, varying vintages, so very vintage specific wines, which we like. I think, that sort of goes back to Champagne. Champagne is not a region that, is always wonderful and perfect. And we see that with different Tessa cuvées that come out in only certain vintages. And I think Oregon really does have vintage variation, which is key for me in a vintage wine. There's a reason that we make vintage specific wines, and it is because every vintage is a little bit different. Beyond that, what do I get out of this fruit profile? Well, like I said, this is mostly Pinot Noir with a little bit of Chardonnay as well. So the breakdown is weighted more towards the Pinot side of things. So you're definitely getting more of like an angularity to this wine. But what I love is that it dances right in the middle of like California and Champagne. So Champagne being, very, very austere, linear, bright, citrusy, almost to the point, if you get a super, super dry, low dosage Champagne, how stringent that can be. And it's delicious when you've got things like oysters on the table and you want that great minerality. But I think, for me, sometimes that's not always what I'm after. Sometimes I am after something with like a little bit more texture and breath. The problem with California sparkling is sometimes it can just be a little bit too warm, and we get riper fruit profiles. And so while the dosage may not be as high, you sort of have this sort of perceived sweetness with the California sparklings, and it's not a bad thing by any means. This is just different. We're just sort of trying to isolate the variable here. So what's different about this? Well, I think it's all about the fruit profile for me. So where you get, really, really tart Granny Smith apples in Champagne, and maybe, those really sweet sort of gala apples that you get with a California sparkling, you're getting somewhere in the middle. So that's sort of like pretty, maybe it's a Granny Smith apple, but maybe it's, been left on the vine for the tree for just a little bit too long. Or maybe it's sat on the counter and it's just sort of been macerated. So you still get all of that really great acidity, but there's a goldenness to it. I took that first sip. You guys watched me take that first sip. It was zippy and bright. And I definitely felt myself salivating, but I also felt, there was a lot of balance. I wasn't like, reaching for a bite of food to counteract everything. So I do love that about these wines. These are super small production. And I think, when we look at emerging trends, it's generally the smaller producers, right? That pave that way. It's the ones that are really focused. They're really narrow niche. And like I said, though there are other producers of sparkling wine, none have really taken it's very costly to make sparkling wine, as I'm sure some of you already know. Very expensive process. It takes, years and years and years, as opposed to making Chardonnay that can age for a year and then come out the following vintage. You're talking about, really aging it, laborious process to make in general, but then also the time that it takes to age these wines on their lees, the dosage, everything that goes into making these wines. It's very, very cost and labor intensive. And so what I love is that, this is really the first time that we're seeing someone just take the bull by the horns and really go after it, just focus specifically on sparkling wine. They don't do anything else besides this, or at least not at this point. Everything, like I said, is vintage specific as well. So, nothing that they're sort of just bulk blending and doing. Everything definitely has not only a sense of place, but a sense of year. Each of these wines have been very, very different. And I've loved seeing the uniqueness between each and every cuvee. As far as, where you might see wines like these and why, this is an important place to pay attention to, these are still super small production. And we don't have a lot of examples of wines being produced in this way from Oregon, i.e. sparkling wine made a sparkling wine house that only does sparkling wine made in the traditional method, only does vintage and only does small production. We haven't seen that yet. There has been a significant amount of money invested in custom crush facilities in Oregon. And so I think that is definitely going to be something that pushes or sort of helps to pave the way. And that is something that we are going to look to as we start to build a compendium of different profile of different producers that, we can maybe stock our cellars with. So I think, as we think about that rising tide, like I said, this is definitely a producer that I think is going to lead the charge, and prove that this is a wine that we not only need, but, not only want, but we definitely need. For me, if you're a sommelier, you're a buyer, and you're thinking about, whether or not this is going to have a place on your list, I think the answer has to be yes, right? I mean, I think, the interest is definitely there. I think about, my time in New York, my time in California, even in California, it was funny, even working at Press, we had a ton of Oregon wines just sort of like stashed away because people were really excited about them. And I think for good reason, myself included. I think when people ask me about what the region is that I'm most excited about, I'm generally saying it's Oregon. I've been loving the Chardonnays. Of course, the Pinots are delicious. For me, the Chardonnays have really been the stunners of the bunch. But I think that because there is so much love already for Oregon still wines, there is naturally going to be a love for the sparkling category as well. And so if you are a buyer sort of taking bets on whether or not this is going to be a trend, I think the answer has to be yes. I think there has to be a place. Domestic sparkling in general has been a category that I think, has some major players in it. You consider Schaumsburg from Napa Valley, Gloria Ferrer from Sonoma. Certainly you've got Roederer, you've got Domaine Carneros, those are all California producers. And then we have a few from, the other side of the world or other side of the country, in the New York sector. But really, I think, if we look at domestic sparkling and we categorize it, I think that this not only has a place in that section, but I think we could also start to see an emerging trend where that actually starts to split off. So you're going to see major wine lists that get really, really excited about having sparkling wine from Oregon as just a singular sort of section on the wine list. So this is just one producer, I think, that will always be at the top because they were the first, they are the best, they are taking the time and investing the money in what needs to be done, and I think they will be rewarded for that long term. Let's get back to this wine and see how it's drinking because I'm thirsty. Yeah, I mean, I think if I were blinding this wine, I'd be very confused about where I am right now. This feels like maybe a riper vintage of Champagne. In some ways, that actually this reminds me of the Taittinger Comte de Champagne. So sort of that like silkiness, that really nice viscosity. And Chardonnay in Oregon has always sort of had that for me. And not that this is all Chardonnay, but I think, Pinot Noir and Chardonnay, as much as there's an angularity to those wines, they have such great texture. And I think, not in every vintage, but I love some of these Chardonnays that come out of there that have the brightness and the acidity and all the minerality that we love. But underneath of there is this like gorgeous sort of like Meursault-like silken viscosity that I love so much. And I think that's really translating in this wine for me. I think about, my friends, my family who enjoy sparkling wine, but I think, for some people, as I mentioned, Champagne, especially the really, really dry ones, are just too much. I think they, and we certainly don't want to do compare and contrast between, which region is better, because I think they can both exist in the same world and we can, enjoy them at different times. But I do think that there is a very special place for this sparkling. And I think it is because there is a large contingency of people that do not love the amount of acidity that we get with Champagne. They want the brightness and they want the cleanness of it, and they don't want all of the ripeness, but they don't want it to be, super astringent, like their enamels being torn off their teeth. So I think, for me, this is a category I'm definitely going to be paying attention to. I think, you guys probably should be as well. But like I said, this is a boutique producer. It's going to take time. There's not a lot of wine they're making. It's less than 2,500 cases. I should mention that, the people involved in this project definitely have a long history of making great sparkling wine. So, they've brought in from Graham Beck in South Africa. He's a partner in this project with Andy, and together they have a wide history of being in the wine business together. But then they also have their winemaker, who is another deep history of making sparkling wine in Oregon. So this is a great team that they've compiled to make sure that the best things can be made possible with sparkling wine from Oregon. And I think it's super exciting, to be on the before side of things. We always talk about what happens on the after, what's exciting about the new up and coming region. But we're very much on the sort of the crest of what's possible. And I'm super thankful to be introduced to these wines when I was. It's been really fun to discover them. Oh, I love that. You can sniff a great wine a mile away. Well, I hope someday I have a sniffer as good as you. I don't know if I can sniff it from a mile away, but I can definitely sniff it from right here, and I can tell you this is delicious. I think it should be noted that these are not inexpensive wines. I think wines of this caliber, of this quality, with the amount of work and wonderful fruit sources. I mean, these are high quality premium grapes that are going into these wines. And I think that's also maybe a distinction that we should make, is this isn't just, what happens once the grapes get to the winery and the wine starts being made. These, the original part of what's happening, the origin story of this wine in the vineyard is something to be noted as well. So really high quality premium fruit sources that, could very well go into a wonderful still wine, but instead it's being turned into sparkling. So definitely worth noting there. What am I going to have for dinner with this tonight, I wonder? I had this with sushi not too long ago. It was delicious. But I think, I don't have any oysters at home. Obviously, oysters and sparkling wine are always a go-to. I think for me, this is a sparkling wine that can really, especially because, especially the rosé, I think these are wines that can, obviously be paired very, very well with food, but I think they're quite enjoyable on their own. I love, taking people from start to finish all the way with sparkling wine. I don't know if that's something that you've experimented with I don't know if that's something that you've personally experimented with, but I think this is a fun experiment, if you haven't, to pour some sparkling wine for your guests when they start, maybe start them with something like the Brut that I'm drinking here. Have them set down their glasses, and then, take them through, if you guys are sitting down for dinner, whenever we're allowed to do that again, take them through with a nice bottle of rosé. And I think you'll find that even with, decadent dishes, i.e., roast duck, roast chicken, even, I've had great success with like roast lamb. The amount of texture that's in these wines combined with the amount of acidity, I really love taking people from start to finish. And then, of course, rosé sparkling at the end of any meal is a very, very welcome and wonderful thing to have. When your palate is a little bit exhausted from all that deliciousness, maybe you end with cheese. I don't know, and you go back to this wine. Cheese in this wine would be delicious, especially if you had, a great local California cheese, or domestic sort of cheese, something on the softer side of things to just kind of like round out your night with. Maybe some, I don't know, dried apricots. Can you tell that I'm hungry? Speaking of apricots, I do get a lot of apricot in this wine. A lot of like really great apricot. Can you pair it with a spicy Peruvian dish? Well, you could. The problem with spicy food and dry wines is that they tend to amplify the spice. So if you are okay with amplifying the spice, then I'd say, yeah, go for it. But I will warn you that anytime you've got spiciness, you should probably be looking towards something with a little bit more like texture and a little bit more sweetness even. This is probably a little bit too on the dry and bright side for a Peruvian dish, but I'm not going to stop you. It sounds delicious. Peruvian food sounds really, really good. And there's, some of my favorite dishes have been from Peru. Now, if you're talking about something like, I don't know, maybe like a ceviche, then we're definitely in business with sparkling wine. And that would be totally fine. So this is where I would take this wine if I am a consumer, if I am a sommelier, a wine buyer. I guess I'm sort of D, all of the above those things. This is definitely something I'm paying attention to. I am watching Lytle-Barnett to see what their next moves are. I am paying attention to see who else is going to follow suit, because I do believe that because these wines are being made the way that they are, i.e. vintage only, with the best grapes possible in the traditional method, aged for 3 years, and made with all the love and care that you would see from a premium sparkling region like Champagne, then this is something that you can't not pay attention to. So price-wise, you're looking in, they're not inexpensive, like I said, still sub $100, but well worth seeking out some of the best domestic sparkling I've ever had. That includes the really famous ones from California. And I don't know. I'm really excited. I think, as I mentioned, how often do we get to be ahead of the trend? So I'm thrilled to be here. This is my sound endorsement of this wine. I hope you guys will go out and find this wine if you haven't already. And you'll be able to find it at your local wine shops. The wine is going to start sort of trickling out into different places. But like I said, under 2,500 cases, that means there's not a lot to go around. So in the meantime, if you can't find it, do go ahead and go on their website and order it directly. And I think, also one other thing to mention, I think, as we're all looking for ways to support our economy in a very, very difficult time, though we should always be supporting, our neighbors and our friends and the people that are in our own backyard, this is a great way to support local. And I think this is an awesome way to show some love, not only for Oregon, but for the country that I think, a lot of us live in. I know that this channel is very international, but for those of you living in the US that, want to support what's happening, the wine industry is a huge industry. There's many, many wonderful producers right here in the United States, of course, in Oregon, California, wherever. And I think it's a great opportunity to support all of the efforts that are happening right here in our own backyard. So support local, support Oregon, get on the bandwagon, be the first. You can say, like, I knew them when before they were super famous, which they will be. So enjoy the rest of your evening, everyone, and I will see you again soon. Tomorrow is weekly wine picks, and we'll be talking about Chardonnay. So I'll see you all when I see you. If you've got questions, throw them in the comments, and I'll be sure to answer them. Bye.